Okay, it's the morning after the night before and Saturday's final, which of course confirmed India as the T20 World Champions, having gone through the tournament unbeaten and beating a very good South Africa team in what was an excellent final. It feels very much like the calm before the storm, I'm afraid, here in Barbados, with Hurricane Beryl barrelling its way towards the island. So our fingers very much crossed for the people here.
Can I pick you up on something you said to me over dinner last night, by the way? Over pizza, you turned to me and said, what are we going to talk about in the podcast tomorrow? I mean, we've literally had a World Cup final. We've got two of the all-time greats retiring from the game. We've got a test match in England to look forward to. It's Jimmy Anderson's last test. And there's a hurricane on its way. Do we think we've got enough news to cover?
Plenty to talk about. And for you, it's not a case of women and children first, because you've changed your flight, haven't you? You're out of here.
I'm going via St Kitts in about an hour. St Kitts, Antigua, Gatwick, Chelmsford.
Okay, good luck with that. Okay, well, it was a terrific final, first of all, wasn't it? There've not been, I don't think, that many memorable games in this tournament, but that was certainly one, and it was a fitting way to finish.
Yeah, I was thinking that yesterday, actually. Sometimes with T20 cricket, they're great while you're having them, and then a year or two down the line, you sort of, what happened in that semi-final, what happened in that group game, or even what happened in that final? I think everyone will remember this final, especially some of those South African players. They'll remember it for the rest of their lives. It was a great final, great pitch. I think the pitch had a lot to do with it. If you have a good surface, 170, 180, 190, that sort of surface, it generally produces good cricket. Two top sides, unbeaten before the end. Great crowd in, not a sellout, but a really good crowd. And South Africa will look back at 30 of 30 with Klassen and Miller going well and ask themselves for years to come, how did we not win that game? And it speaks volumes for the toughness, actually, in Indian cricket. We talk a lot about their resources and their players and their fan base and the IPL, but what I think they showed in those last 30 deliveries was a steely toughness to get over the line.
Well, they were unquestionably the best team in the tournament. I think they won in a variety of conditions. You know, we talked about the conditions in Guyana, which were low and slow and skiddy, but they won on up and down pitches in New York. They won on a good surface against Australia in St Lucia, and as you say, a very good pitch at Kensington. So what this tournament has done, because it's been played over 6 or 7 islands here in the Caribbean and 2 or 3 venues in America, it's thrown up all manner of challenges and all manner of conditions for teams to cope with. And in order to win and come out on top, you had to kind of be adaptable in all those conditions. So I don't think there's any way that you can't say India proved themselves to be the best team, because every hurdle that they come up against, or every conditions that they played in, they came out on top.
Yeah, best team, best captain for me as well, Rohit Sharma. I think he showed that yesterday, and he's shown it throughout the tournament. Best bowler in Jasprit Bumrah. I know he was named player of the tournament just throughout the tournament. His economy was just above or around 4.5 in a whole tournament in a T. I mean, that'd be pretty good in 50 overs. Some would take it in Test match, but he's done it in a T20 World Cup. So they've done it. They've gone unbeaten, and emotional scenes at the end. You know, I was down there doing some flash interviews and people were in tears. You know, steely, sort of tough cricketers. Indian cricketers have to carry that sort of weight of expectancy and weight of the crowd, and what, you know, imagine if they'd lost that game, what would the narrative have been today? But you could see Hardik in tears, you know, saying that what the last 6 months has taken out of him on and off the cricket field. Rohit Sharma on the ground, beating the ground, in tears. Some really emotional scenes. Rahul Dravid going round in his last game as coach, hugging everyone. So I think that's important, actually, Dravid and Rohit. I think a team often becomes, you know, extension of their captain and coach. And I think that's what they showed at the end. Rohit Sharma and Rahul Dravid. We know Rahul very well. He was a tough cricketer. Rohit Sharma, a calm but tough cricketer and captain. And I think that's what they showed at the end.
Yeah, I thought Rohit's an interesting story, because 17 years ago he was a 20-year-old in that 2007. It wasn't called the World Cup then, it was called the World T20. I'd actually forgotten that he played in that game.
Someone picked you up on Twitter,
yeah, so long ago. And I'd said, you know, Virat was the sole survivor from the 2011 World Cup win, which he was. But Rohit had played in that 2007 game in Johannesburg. And I think sometimes when things come to you early and easily in life, you don't always appreciate them. I look back, and that was, I think, his 4th T20 international for India. So he hadn't played Test cricket. He was still 6 years away from playing Test cricket. So he's right at the start of his career. And then when you win something like that as a 20-year-old in just your 4th or 5th game, you must think, well, it's easy. You know, these ICC events, global trophies just come around every 2 minutes. And, of course, he's had to wait 17 years for another T20 and more than a decade after that Champions Trophy win against England in 2013. So I think that was partly all that emotion that came out at the end, the long, long wait, the near misses that they'd had, 5 finals I think they'd been beaten in. And, of course, if India had lost, whether he'd announced his retirement, who knows, but he must have felt that this was probably his last opportunity to win a T20 World Cup. So I think that the longevity of the wait made it all the more special for him, and of course the fact that he was captain.
Yeah, and the captaincy bit, he instigated the change in mentality from slightly fearful cricket to fearless cricket. I think Adelaide holds a place for England and India, actually, in that what happened at Adelaide for Owen Morgan when they lost to Bangladesh. He decided then that they're going to have to change and play fearless cricket. And what happened in Adelaide in the 20-over World Cup for India against England, that there was that moment when Rohit Sharma decided we cannot keep playing this fearful cricket. We can't plod along. The resources and the players and the skills that we have, why are we playing like this? In particular with the bat, why don't we go out and express ourselves? Easy to say, but hard to do as an Indian cricketer because you're always worried about the reaction if you play like that and lose. So he instigated the change in mentality of fearless cricket. We saw that against Australia, the way he batted. We saw it against England on that pitch in Guyana that was tough for batting. And even though he missed out yesterday, you could see it throughout that side. And I think that's also why he was quite emotional, that going back to Adelaide, the way he would have felt walking off that field and the way he felt walking off the field yesterday, completely chalk and cheese.
Virat Kohli, another one who's announced his T20 international retirement, and you made the point that he was either going to be the hero or the villain after that innings. And it reminded me, actually, that punditry, or what we do, is often works backwards. You start from the end result, and then you make judgment on that. So India won, ergo very good innings. Had India lost, there'd have been a lot of people saying not such a good innings. But actually at the time I felt also that 3 wickets down, he's got to get India to a kind of total to give their bowlers something to have a crack at. And I think that's the key with this India side, that their bowling attack is so good. They've got Bumrah, the bowler of the tournament. They've got those excellent spinners. So if you get a score of around about 170, you're always in the game. And I think that was probably at the back of his mind as well.
Absolutely. Going back to your first point, teams and leadership think, don't worry about the result, just stick to the process. We often hear that, do the process, when actually punditry, it's the result, and then you react to it. But, Kohli, I thought, we said before we did an interview just before a sort of build-up to the final, and I said, just bat like Virat Kohli, bat like you've done in the last decade. You've got a strike rate of 138. You've got players around you. You're a touch player. You'll get a couple of boundaries away, and then you'll be back in rhythm. And he got a couple of boundaries, first few deliveries, and you could see he was back to batting like the Kohli we've known for a number of years. And your point is spot on. They're 3 down. What does he do? Does he go hard and suddenly they're 5 down, and then you're under pressure, you're virtually on the verge of losing yet another final. So I thought he played it just about right. There were 37 deliveries in the middle of that innings where he didn't get a boundary, and it left Hardik Pandya with just 2 balls to face at the end. So like going back to the process and the result.
If you were captain, you'd have retired him, would you?
No, I would not. So I think he absolutely got it right because of the bowling attack. We get a score in a final and the opposition. We know what South Africa are like in knockout games. Towards the end, can they get over the line? So what he did was very smart. Get a score over to you, South Africa. And it was one of those in-between scores. It was still a very good pitch. What did you make of South Africa? And in particular, the end of that innings and how Rohit handled it, because Bumrah still had 2 left. And when he bowled Bumrah, it was a fascinating period towards the end.
You're very lucky, because had my tip come in, I would have been sat here making you say on repeat, knows more about cricket.
You were
than
in
me.
you were in that spare room where we're all sat as commentators. You might as well have been wearing a South African shirt. You were up and down. Go for 4, go for 6. It's like you were half South African.
Well, they were my tip, and of course, both of us have to sit here in humility now and say that Owen Morgan knows more than either of us. Because
we had the video ready to go where Morg said they haven't got a chance, South Africa.
I have to say I was worried from the outset because Marco Jansen bowled a very poor first over, didn't he? You said it got Kohli away with two drive balls to knock it to the cover fence, but the one ball he hit a length was a dot ball and went through nicely, but then he just seemed to float it up on a driving line. So I was a bit concerned from the outset, but then when Klassen and Miller were going, I thought South Africa should have got home. First of all, Klassen is a remarkable player. I mean, some of those shots of Axar Patel, that's when every tournament you kind of think, well, where is the game changing? And that ability now of batters to hit just slightly short balls from spinners back over their heads it's a remarkable shot.
And again, result and how you go about it. He bowled his spinners quite long at Klassen. We all know that Klassen is one of the great players of spin in world cricket, if not the best at the moment for the shots that you talk about, because you bowl length and he pulls you, so you have to go fuller and he whacks you back over your head. But Rohit bowled a bit of spin at him. And I know there were a few captains and commentators in that room going, why hasn't he brought Bumrah back yet? And Bumrah had a couple left. Why hasn't he brought Bumrah back? He should be bowling now. And he sort of delayed, and then he did bring Bumrah back, and Bumrah just absolutely nailed that over, and Arshdeep at the other end. And India's fielding, something that's not always been there.
We should talk about that catch of Sky's at long on. I had a brilliant view of it, actually, because I'd come down to our position. I wasn't working on the commentary, as you know, but our position for Sky was just by the main pavilion there, and so we had a brilliant view of the catch. He came round, and the athleticism and awareness and composure behind that catch was fantastic. It was a great moment, brilliantly called by our friend Ian Smith.
Who dissed us the night before. We invited him out for dinner. I mean, one thing, you're guaranteed if you invite Ian Smith out for dinner, he's going to be there. But he didn't rock up, so he's completely dissed you from your Channel 4 days or whatever.
Well, he called it memorably, and it was a great catch, wasn't it?
It was under pressure. I mean, we see those catches. Every game we see a catch every other game we see those catches on the boundary. So it wasn't specifically the catch.
No, it was the context.
It was the context and the moment. I read a tweet last night. If Sky's boot size was one size bigger from 9 to 10, South Africa win the World Cup. He hits the cushion, goes for 6, and David Miller gets you over the line. He's on strike. He's hitting with the wind, leg side. Hardik Pandya may not get it right. So it is those fine margins. So catching it under pressure. People have been comparing Kapil Dev's catch in 1983 World Cup, Viv running back over his shoulder. Those sort of two iconic moments. Magnificent scenes at the end.
So that's the tournament done, really. We should reflect on it a little bit, the good and the bad and the indifferent. You started off in Dallas. You ended in Barbados. You pretty much... Well, you've not been to all the islands because I don't think you went to St. Vincent, but you've been well travelled. Thumbs up, thumbs down, what do you think?
There's always things you can do better. There's things that they'd wish they'd done better. Maybe the ICC, that pitch in New York, although it produced really good cricket.
Very different style of cricket.
Exactly.
Everybody expected a run fest after the IPL, and in fact, Rob Key had almost flagged it up as it's going to be a slugfest, I think was the term, but it was a long way from that.
Yeah, absolutely, which I think made for better cricket, actually. But that one at times was so uneven and dangerous at times. There were a couple of games where batters were getting wrapped. I don't mind slightly two-pace. I don't mind lower scores. I do mind dangerous. So, I didn't think they got that quite right. But obviously, you're having to bring in pitches and, groundsmen from Adelaide and stuff like that coming. It's not an easy gig. Doing pitches, but I think 10:30 starts. Imagine that final. Imagine that game under lights last night and the atmosphere. It was pretty good atmosphere anyway. But in general, I've really enjoyed it. I think it's captured the most important thing. The World Cup out here, 50 over World Cup. What year was that? That it didn't
2007.
It didn't capture the imagination of the Caribbean. It didn't get the feel of the Caribbean across at all. I think travelling around the Caribbean in particular, I think judging and talking to people wherever we go, that pizza place we go to every night here, that lady that's there working, every night she's talking to us about her favourite cricketers and who's going to win and who's not. Every cab you jump into, they're talking cricket. So I think that's the key, capturing, because we know, you know how much this place means to you. It means a lot to me. I played my first test match here and in Jamaica. So I think it has worked. I think the cricket has been excellent. I think the best team won. The standard of play has been magnificent. And I have liked the fact that scores have been lower as opposed to just sixes and fours have to be an event. And in recent franchise tournaments, they've not been an event. Here it has been an event. Watching Klassen and Miller at the end there was like, wow, this is really good now, as opposed to, there's another six. So I've enjoyed it. What about you?
One of the things that I would flag is the 10:30 starts, and this, we've talked about it before, but whether the game is a spectator first game or a television first game, this felt like a television first event, and I think you have to be careful with that because T20 is best under lights. That's when you get the kind of atmosphere and the vibrancy. So I would have preferred to see more day-night games than day games. And with the end of a tournament like this, it's often the end of a cycle for teams. It's often the end of careers for some players in terms of their T20 international careers. So we mentioned Rohit and Virat yesterday, who said they were retiring from the format. But also others like David Warner and Trent Boult. We won't see them again in a T20 World Cup. And both have been exceptional players for their countries.
Yeah, they have. There's some big names there that are retiring. I think the one disappointing side, maybe, and probably the one with issues going from maybe side like New Zealand.
Yeah.
For so long, New Zealand
feels like a little bit of an end of an era for that.
It does, very much so. I think Australia will sort of subtly get players in, and same with India. India have so many resources, Jaiswal and Shubman Gill and Sanju Samson, whatever. It will be a pretty easy turnaround, although Kohli and Rohit are not easy acts to follow. But New Zealand have been together for so long, and so it does feel like the end of an era. And it'd be interesting to know and see. Obviously, they got Rachin Ravindra, who looks a star player and will be for a long time, in my opinion. But what have they got coming through to take over from Kane Williamson eventually, or Bolt, or Saudi, or players that have been around for such a long time? And England, what do you think about England?
Well, I made the point yesterday that I think in India and Australia have kind of opened up a little bit of a gap from the others, and that includes England. So we'll get on to England. But I think when you look at where England are, they're looking upwards at the moment to India and Australia. India have just contested the three finals of the ICC format, so the World Test Championship, the 50 over World Cup and the T20, which they've just won, obviously. And Australia came here looking for a three-timer. So you'd have to say at the moment that those two teams stand out and that there's a gap then between them and the rest. And that's England's challenge, isn't it? To close that gap, narrow that gap, and get back to challenging the elite in these global tournaments.
Can I just ask you about England, though? You're right, a gap is slightly emerging there. But when we do the toss quite often, you get the team sheet, and you look at the team sheet. And when I look at that England team sheet, it's still a wow factor in there. And not just, like I'm saying, New Zealand, just names that have been around for a long time and wow. Like even the young players coming through, like Jack started the tournament. We know what Jacks can do, Salt coming in or whatever. So when I look and I see Butler, England's greatest ever white ball player, I see Jacks, wow, emerging talent. Salt, Jacks, Bairstow, Brook, Curran, every franchise in the world seems to want Sam Curran. Jofra Archer, every franchise when fit. He's one of the great multi-phase bowlers in the game. But they sort of 50 over World Cup and this one, they're, out of the major nations, they only beat the West Indies. They seem to be sort of bumbling along, for want of a better phrase.
I think their win-loss ratio against the full test-playing nations is lost 9, won 3 over the 2 World Cups. So that, I think, backs up your point.
So what's happening?
Well, good question. I'm not sure we got the answers, at our fingertips, but I think therein lies the challenge, that it's not a lost cause for England, because, as you say, all those players are very good players. There will be some regeneration. I think by the time we next see England's white ball team, I think they will move on from one or two of those players who are in their mid to late 30s now. I think Moeen Ali's 37. Johnny Bairstow's 34, Chris Jordan 35. So I think there will be a regeneration. But I think there is an abundance of talent in England, in England's domestic white ball game. And I suppose it's just a matter of harnessing that talent and trying to create a new era, if you like, of sustained success. But before that, we've got test matches against West Indies and Sri Lanka. And England on Sunday announced their test match team. It was a test match squad. Well, it was very interesting because you think some test match squads, when they're announced, you think, well, that's obvious or there's not really much to talk about. This one felt quite a significant squad to me for a couple of reasons. One, they plumped for Jamie Smith as wicketkeeper batter, 23-year-old, incredibly promising young batsman, but not the first choice pick as keeper for Surrey in first-class cricket. And of course, they've left out Johnny Bairstow, Harry Brook returning, who missed the test match series in India. But Bairstow's not in that squad at all. The reserve batter is Dan Lawrence. So it feels like Johnny Bairstow has been moved aside. They've plumped for Jamie Smith. They've also gone for Shoaib Bashir, who is not, again, the first choice pick for his county side. When Somerset play one spinner and Jack Leach is fit, Leach plays and Bashir had to go out on loan to Worcester. So it was an interesting selection for all kinds of reasons. You do feel like this selection panel have an interesting relationship with county cricket. They don't always... They Rob Key, I think, said earlier on in the year that when he was asked about England's wicket-keeping position, he said, well, whoever we pick, it won't necessarily be on county championship form. Well, they've been as good as they were. They're not afraid of taking risks. I mean, I haven't seen much of Jamie Smith keep wicket, because he hasn't done it that much in first-class cricket. He is a very, very promising batter.
He's
highly
very talented,
attacking,
fits into them,
batter,
fits in
into
perfectly,
for the Bazball mould, which, of course, Folkes doesn't.
Pennington, you were waxing lyrical about Pennington at the beginning of the season.
Well, funnily enough, it's bizarre because my mate Steve James, who you know well, had a young lad that he coaches who was playing in a university game right at the start of the season. I can't remember for which university side. And they were playing a friendly against Notts. And Jamo had said to me, have a look at the lad I coach and tell me what you think. So I was watching the stream a bit. And actually then Pennington took my eye. It was March, April. So way back at the start of the season, I thought, oh, blimey, he's looking good. Because if you remember, he kind of took people's eye about 5 or 6 years ago when he was an England under-19 player at Worcester. And he had a good season, and people were saying this looks a highly promising young fast bowler. And then he kind of, as young players do, stagnated a bit. He's moved to Notts for a chance to work with Peter Moores and Kevin Shine and a bigger club and all that. And I think from what I've seen this year, he's, back on the upgrade, if you like. The graph is going upwards again. So that's an interesting selection. And he's a beneficiary of Josh Tong, who's injured, and Ollie Robinson, who had a poor winter, really. Played that one test match in Ranchi, but it was a poor performance. And so he's been nudged aside as well.
Yeah, it's very key, McCullum-Stokes. They don't worry about the sort of criticism they may get if Jamie Smith hasn't kept, or if Bashir hasn't played and he's gone off on loan and he got smashed for 38 the other day. They're not worried if they've made their mind up about something. And I quite like that. Often, sometimes in selection, you sort of do, and with captaincy, you sort of do the thing that if it goes wrong, will get the least amount of abuse or stick, or media will give you, that was a decent decision. Be brave if you really believe in something. And obviously, Rob Key, we know he's very much interested in speed. What speed would you think Pennington would be?
Well, I'd say, he's not Gus Atkinson,
right?
Or probably Josh Tong. Right. Gus Atkinson's in the squad as well. Yeah. He's certainly not Mark Wood or Jofra Archer. He's quick enough, yeah. I think, which is the key.
Yeah, and obviously the reason for that is they want to move on, and it's Jimmy's.
Well,
he's playing at Southport today, isn't he?
It's sold out. First day of Lancashire's Championship game at Southport. It's a place where I made my first-class debut. It's a lovely little ground on the coast. My wife was
born just up the road from there.
Absolutely, you know Southport well. So Jimmy's there, sold-out game at Southport, and he's getting a few overs into his legs before what will be a very emotional test match at Lord's next week. Just on Bashir, I think they see that, thinking about the Ashes, which is a long way ahead, but England are basically going to be playing one spinner, aren't they, unless they go to the subcontinent where they might play two or three. But in England, they'll play one. In Australia, they're likely to play one. And I think they see in Bashir, with his accuracy, height, bounce, drop, whatever, that he can do a job as that one spinner, both holding and attacking in the same way that Nathan Lyon does it for Australia.
Yeah, and the same way that Graham Swan did it for England for a number of years. He's no Graham Swan yet, but they see that drop and that bounce. And what an English spinner has to do in England, like you touched on there, it's two different phases. In that first innings in England, how many pitches really turn? How much bowling do you get? Your four seamers are rotated, and when you do come on, the opposition may be lining you up a little bit, especially in modern cricket. So you've got to do a holding role. And then second time round, you may have to wait. You may do nothing in the game. You may come down at number 9 or 10 or wherever he bats. You've got to work on your batting as well, which he has done. And then second time round, suddenly a skipper goes, it's just starting to turn. It won't be big turn like in India. And now you've got to bowl him out. So it's also a mental thing for someone like him. But they fancied him before India. That was a real out of the blue. We were literally driving to Isleworth Sky, and the side was announced for India, and I was going to Google to see footage of him bowling because I'd never seen him bowl. So that was a left field then. They backed him. And one thing with this selection panel, if they believe in you and they back you, they will give you a long time. And I quite admire that. And now he's just got to go and do it against the West Indies.
So all that's ahead. That test match is a week Wednesday, so we'll do a podcast.
If we get there.
If we get there, we'll do a podcast ahead of that test match. You've got to get yourself to the airport. I have later. That's it from us here after a month-long World T20. Our fingers very much crossed for Barbados later today and tomorrow as this storm arrives.